For me, in this movement, law provided very good tool to advance the work of human rights. I was trained as a lawyer and I knew law. But I tried to use it to help victims. For example, when we first started to work, we started by visiting police detention center. And reason for that is that our constitution for many years had guaranteed that every accused has right to consult their lawyers. But none of the detainees detained in detention would have access to lawyers. We have thousands of cases of illegal detention, torture, abuse in detention centers, but no one would actually know what was going on. No lawyers would have actually visit police detention center at that time. So I then took that constitutional provision as a sort of tool, leverage to enter into detention centers, documenting the cases of torture and helping out the people who are deprived of their liberty. So continuously like that, I have been using law to assist survivors and also to bring the change in the society. And I could give you a number of examples how we have used the law to bring the change in Nepal. There are laws which are already in place, but they are not implemented. And human rights violations are the result of non-implementations of already existing laws. So on the one hand, we use the law, existing law, to ensure rights of the citizens. At the same time, there are situations where laws are not adequate. And even in that situations, using the existing law, we have provided a sort of evidence, because as you use it, you also could expose or explain or unpack how these laws are limiting the rights of individuals, for example. So we have actually created the evidence based by using existing law, also to advocate for the new laws and amendments of the existing laws. So it's both way actually. There are cases where laws are not sufficient because of the inadequate availability of law. Victims don't have rights. For example, torture is not defined as crime in Nepal, though constitution says that it shall be criminalized. But then you need a law, in enabling legislation to provide a sort of details where you go to complain, which is the institution to do investigations, and what is the reparations and the punishment for the perpetrators, for example. So in absence of that law, this constitutional rights has no meaning. I think this work against impunity that I have been doing has been putting us at a greater risk. Nepal has huge, human rights community, but the work against impunity is the key, I think, challenge that we have been facing. In Nepal, despite thousands of cases of human rights violations, those hardcore human rights violations such as torture, enforced disappearances, killings, none of the perpetrators has been brought to justice. And we try to challenge that extent of impunity. What bothers me every day is the fact why, despite so many cases, not even one single perpetrator is brought to justice. So there is no confidence of the public in the public institutions, government. Whatever changes that Nepal has gone through has been very fragile. We could not consolidate democracy. We could not progress because of this extent of impunity, which perpetuates lack of rule of law and violence. So we started to challenge the organization that I led, called Advocacy Forum, that actually started to document, investigate cases of human rights violations and started to build the case. So we assisted hundreds of victims to bring complaints demanding criminal investigations in some of these cases, challenging this extent of impunity, where evidences are sufficient, where you have already identified the perpetrators. So in those cases, we have filed the complaint. So first time it had actually started to happen in Nepal. Obviously, in the beginning, there was no registrations. Authority would flatly deny that they would register the complaint, forget about investigations and prosecutions. But we kept challenging that. We assisted victim to challenge the denial of registrations in the Supreme Court, for example, on number of situations. So there are decisions from the Supreme Court forcing authority, mainly the police and prosecutor, to investigate on some of these cases that we have assisted victims. In some situations, court had also issued arrest warrant against the perpetrators. So that actually then was a sort of shock for those who have been enjoying impunity for so many centuries in Nepal. So then they started to take us as a threat. And then there was constant kind of media propaganda against us. Obviously, they were also trying to defy court orders. There was no respect to court orders. Despite the arrest warrant by the court, the authority would not arrest anyone who has been accused of committing human rights violations, for example. We nevertheless constantly used law and the Supreme Court to advance the space for human rights work in Nepal. In the context like Nepal, addressing impunity is key in contributing Nepal's peace, consolidation of democracy, and development. It is also a sort of ways in which you address a long-rooted problem of inequality in the society, because people have such a sort of feeling that law does not protect you equally, because those who are in power are always above the law. And challenging impunity, we are trying to ensure that there is no one above the law and everyone is equal before the law, which is the very basic foundation for democracy in any country to flourish. But unfortunately, this case in particular has posed serious threats to the interest of perpetrators. Those perpetrators are still in the government. They are in powerful positions. They are military, they are police, they are the leaders of the political parties, and they are involved in different structures of the government. So they could use, and they have been using, all the means to make the case failed, and also targeting lawyers, human rights activists, working on this case in particular, for example. They have been labeling us as a traitor, as a peace spoilers, as the spies or agents of imperialists. And what I have been publicly telling all the time is that if believing in rule of law, believing in justice and human rights is something called traitor or agents of imperialists or the peace spoilers, I'm actually happy to be all of them, and I'm very proud. And I really think that everyone should be traitor, everyone should be dollar mongers, everyone should be peace spoilers if believing in human rights and challenging impunity is something called that. They have been publicly, for example, demanding the violence against some of the human rights activists, including me. The political party who used to be in the government at that time, they had a sort of monthly magazines where they put our pictures in the front page as like traitors of the nations or enemy of the nations, and then asking their cadres to do people's actions. In their view, people's actions is the assassinations and physical violence against the person. So they are also inciting violence against human rights defenders, and which is going on constantly in Nepal against few human rights defenders. It is not the case for everyone, but those who are working against impunity, who demand accountability and dare to challenge the crimes that those who are in power have been committing are the ones who are put in great risk in Nepal.